My name is Ankur Patel, and I am the Director of Advancement for Hindu University of America. And today's webinar is on discovering the contemporary relevance of Hindu Dharma. And it's been an amazing journey for me personally with Hindu University of America, where I have discovered how important, how impactful Hindu Dharma, Sanatan Dharma, affects me, affects us, affects the planet, in every aspect of life. And in this webinar, we're really focusing on a new course that really aims at exploring this, especially for young people, 18 to 35, right? Is Hindu Dharma relevant in the contemporary world? You know, why? Has it been superseded by Western modernity? I don't think so. And thank you for joining us for this webinar today, where we're gonna discuss and dive into this and how do we actually enable young people and young adults to explore these questions on the relevance of Hindu Dharma, you know, for yourselves in an academic setting. So we have with us today, President of Hindu University of America, Sri Kalyan Viswanathan. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with him as he guides the university and introduces and brings new courses, new offerings every quarter, where we're presenting ideas in a way that is digestible and consumable and accessible to Hindus, non-Hindus, people around the world through Hindu University of America, through courses like this one. And our special guest is Kavindra Rishi, Jeffrey Armstrong. Kalyanji, do you want to give some context before I give Kavindraji an introduction?
Yeah, I was just wondering if he's here or not. So I just elevated Vasa Sandy. I hope he's here soon.
Can you hear me?
Jeffrey, yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, but you can't see me.
But I can see you, yeah.
Okay, I've been here all along listening.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why my camera is not on. That's a mystery.
Okay.
So let me try to figure this out.
All right. While you figure that out, I think it would be appropriate, Ankur, to introduce Jeffrey Armstrong, please.
Yeah, so Jeffrey was in our participant. I've promoted him to a panelist. Now we can see him. So Jeffrey Armstrong, also Kavindra Rishi, is the founder of VASA, Vedic Academy of Sciences and Arts in Vancouver, Canada. He has degrees in psychology, history and comparative religions, and literature. Jeffrey Armstrong is a philosopher, Vedic astrologer, and teacher of Vedic wisdom and the philosophy and psychology of yoga for 45 years. He spent 5 years in an ashram as a monk in India and 10 years as a marketing executive in Silicon Valley. He's got a broad range of experience, and it really gets into how Hindu Dharma is relevant in so many aspects of life. And that's one reason why it's so amazing to have Jeffrey with us today. He's an award-winning poet and best-selling author of books such as Spiritual Teachings of the Avatar, Ancient Wisdom for a New World, the Bhagavad Gita Comes Alive, and a few others. He's been featured in CBC documentary Planet Yoga, Wings of Yoga, and the 2014 Leo award-winning documentary Take Back Your Power. Jeffrey, why don't we hand it off to you and you can get started. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ankur and Kalyan. It's a marvelous moment for the launching of this university out into the world at another level. This really, in my words, is the Vedic Renaissance. It is happening. This is the rebirthing of the Vedic culture and civilization and languages and ideas. And ironically and interestingly enough, it was the skills of Vedic thinkers who reprogrammed the world via technology. And now it's time to reprogram the world with the Vedic wisdom of the rishis. So I always begin, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai, Sri Gurave Namaha. Lest we celebrate ourselves above the rishis and gurus and acharyas, who we are all deeply indebted to, and especially someone like me who came in from the outside, was let in from the outside, and have received so much beauty and wonder from all of the great Vidya of the Vedic culture. So it's my honor to be here today.
So just a little side thought on that note, when you say let in from the outside, I have to say Hinduism sometimes lets in people indiscriminately from the outside. And not
just proof of that.
And therefore, sometimes not to the best outcome. But I want to begin by setting some context for this particular webinar. The title of the webinar is Discovering the Contemporary Relevance of Hindu Dharma. And the title of this webinar is aligned with the course, the title of a course that we are offering in the summer quarter, Discovering the Relevance of Hindu Dharma. And I want to set up the motivation for this course in the following way. I'll tell you a personal story for myself. When I first came to the United States in the year, as a student to Ohio State University in the year 1992, 93 was when I was there. I personally was not particularly grounded in Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma or Vedic knowledge, etc. And in fact, my personal aspiration at the time was more centered on becoming more Western, more scientific, more technological, because I had imbibed the value for what you might call having a scientific temper and letting go of superstition and ritual and all that is considered obsolete, backward, and not contemporary. Certainly. And then I had to go through a process of discovering the contemporary relevance, which for me started in the year 1994, earnestly, and went on has been going on, and I don't think it will end, not in this life for sure. And to kind of put into a few words, what did I discover? I'll point to a couple of things. One is the extraordinary verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu katachana ma karma phalaheturpu mathe sangostu karmane. And to me, that verse was a mind-blowing verse. It was a transformative, it was a kind of a paradigm shattering verse is how I would put it. Because for the first time, I begin to realize that I couldn't always ensure that the outcome I desired in whatever endeavor I was undertaking would in fact happen. And if it did not happen, it did not mean anything about me. It did not mean I was somehow an inferior person, an inadequate person, an incompetent person. So if things didn't go the way I thought they would go, I could separate it out for the first time from it somehow meaning something negative about myself. And that was literally earth-shattering for me, because for the first time I could separate out the two. And it was a great relief. And I've held on to that from that moment that it first came to me as an insight. I would also add one more thing. There is this whole discussion in the Gita about Swadharma and Swabhava, Guna and Karma, and so on. And I've always been seeking to align my inner nature with the work that I did in my outer life. Not always successfully, because being misaligned in terms of our guna, our character, and in terms of our vocation and work is quite often more common than people being really truly aligned in these respects, their lives. And that effort has been converging towards a proper, a more fuller alignment between guna and karma, between inner nature and outer vocation. And today I find myself guiding this Hindu University of America towards its future. I'm profoundly grateful for the opportunity, and deeply inspired by it. So those are a couple of examples of how understanding Hindu Dharma and investing time in it made a profound difference for me. I can imagine that what I have just shared can possibly be irrelevant for any single human being on the planet. So with that little preamble, I want to invite Jeffrey to speak a little bit about his own personal journey in how he came to discover the contemporary relevance of Hindu Dharma for himself in his own life, in his own words. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Kalyan. And again, namaste and pranams to everyone. Thank you for joining us in this historic event. Some years back, Kalyanji, I was contemplating, because I'm a poet by temperament and by action. So I tend to try to do things significantly with words all the time. Since I was quite young, I started writing poetry at age 13. And I went to a carnival one night by myself, one of these Midwest crazy carnivals, and it was just a kind of existential moment. I was alone. Not that that bothered me, but I just was meditating. But I was not taught to meditate. I was from America, in Detroit, Michigan. My parents weren't cultured and sophisticated in any way. I was just waking up somehow with no real guide to guide the process. So I came home from this crazy carnival, which sort of represented the world we were in. All these crazy rides getting you dizzy and spinning you around and trying to get your money and selling you junk food. And it was the world I was born into. And I was questioning it, but I hadn't started yet. And I went downstairs into my basement room. And for the first time in my life, I grabbed a pen and paper. And I wrote the following words. Life is like a carnival filled with dirty little men, grubbing for pennies, offering cheap thrills to stupid people who lead empty, meaningless lives. And when I look in the mirror, I see not one person, but two, and I wonder which one is really me. And from that time on, poetry just flowed through me. But it wasn't until at the end of the 60s, after 5 years of university, after reading everything I could, after finishing a degree in psychology, and declining to move on to get a PhD because I thought my professors were all insane. So how could they make someone sane and put me in charge of crazy people? None of it made any sense. There were no real gurus and acharyas in my life, real truth tellers, just people trying to get a job. And so at a certain point, I realized in this progression that no one had explained to me who I was and why I was here. And so this question, just as Kalyan had a favorite verse, mine is chapter 7, verse 19. Bahunam janmanamante, yanavan mam prapadyate, vasudeva sarvamiti, samahatma sudurlabha. After many, many, many lives in pursuit of knowledge and experience, one finally comes to the conclusion of Vasudeva Sarvam Iti, Samahatma Sudurlabha. Duratma is the name for all of us in our small-minded condition, not asking questions yet, not even asking why we're here or who we are. I was born, Omagana Timirandasya, in darkest ignorance, being fed an education that I knew was not telling me the truth, but I didn't know a truth to counter it with. And it was the Vedic viewpoint that suddenly, thunderously said, your problem is you're seeing only one light. You're defining everything by the body you're in, by where you are, by who gave you birth, by all of these circumstances, but you don't know that you are an immortal being who cannot die, and that you are on an adventure exploring the realms of matter, Prakriti as it's now known to me. So at a certain point, I was up for that adventure, but the world was insane. So one last point that pushed me over. You see, the insanity of the world for me was when I saw the 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan. I was 8 years old when our teacher told us about this event. She said, just repeating, and that the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and a couple of, 100,000 people were evaporated. And when I heard this, I just almost went insane. I felt the pain of all those human beings and all those creatures and I felt the whole thing right to the very core of my being. Now you should be thinking Bhagavad Gita right now. Do you know the story of one of the inventors of the atomic bomb being from Germany? Kalyan, what was his name?
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer. I didn't know at the time that the reason Germans would know Sanskrit is because German is based on Sanskrit, not Latin. So when those weapons were tested in the desert sands of New Mexico, the German scientist whose brilliance was helping to make these weapons of mass destruction watched the first one go off and quoted the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Kalohismi, I am time. When Arjun says, oh Bhagavan, who are you that's entered everything and is eating everything and destroying everything? I am time. Oppenheimer quotes this. When I saw these nuclear weapons used on human beings, I realized that I had been born into an insane asylum where the leaders were brutes and horrible beings who were willing to do this to other living entities. And I lost all confidence in any authority in my civilization at 8 years old. It had no authority after that. It was a despicable civilization, not really civilized. Civilization, did you know it's from the word Shiva? It's Shivilization. So long story short, my friends, eventually this made me adhikari, qualified to achieve a Vedic guru. In 1969, I gave away all my belongings to my friends. I went to a barber and had my head shaved. I went into my guru's ashram. And the first thing he did was have me help him translate the Bhagavad Purana. Not that I knew Sanskrit, but I was very good at English. So we're going to continue with that theme later. But the issue is the most advanced language in existence, Sanskritam, and the most chaotic and confused language in existence, English, met on a battlefield with the British having gunpowder. And I'm sure you've heard the saying. For 300 years, the British dominated India with gunpowder. And in 50 years, India took over England with curry powder. So if you have ears and you can listen, if you're an intellectual and you're interested in knowledge, the last phrase I'm going to give you that I coined is, the Abrahamic religions call themselves people of a book. So I have named the Vedic civilization the people of a library. And the most despicable characters in history burned libraries. I won't mention any names, but if you've studied history, you know who I'm talking about. The most despicable characters burned libraries. The most brilliant cultures made libraries of profound wisdom with the world's most perfect language. And anything that doesn't put that at the top of the list of intellectual achievements in our world is simply a liar or a bad scholar. And with that, back to you, Carl.
Okay. All right, great. Very good. So, I want to now go back and share a little bit about the concept of this course. The course is once again, titled Discovering the Contemporary Relevance of Hindu Dharma. And the most important word in that phrase is discovering, and it is for each person to discover what that is for themselves. And one of the unique aspects of Hindu thought is that every one of us is in a different stage, a different place in our own lives, and what we will discover at a particular given moment in time may be completely different than what someone else may discover at that same moment in time in the same conversation. And what we may discover from the same text at different points of time in our own lives may be completely different. So, if we constitute life in terms of a discovery, it's never too late. It's never not time. It is never not possible to discover something right now, right? And the only prerequisite is that we have an open mind and a willingness to participate in a process that could have some profound transformative value, possibly. Okay. You can never be sure it'll happen, but it could. And that's the opportunity of this course. Now, we have targeted this course specifically for a particular age group. In fact, we would like to have 18 to 35-year-olds, potentially born and raised in the United States or thereabouts, Canada included probably. And, people of that age who are going through a certain, let us say, a crisis of confidence about their own cultures. Invariably, all of us in fact, most of us on this webinar are living with one foot in one culture and another foot in another culture. Whether we were born and raised in a Hindu environment or family and then came to the West, or we were born in the West but in a Hindu family, or we were born in a Western culture and environment but have learnt some degree of appreciation for Hindu thought, for Vedic thought and wisdom and values and so on. We inevitably find ourselves straddling multiple cultures. I think that would be fair to say for almost all of us. More so for the younger generation born and raised in the US or Canada. It is certainly, likely, it's in fact more likely than not, that they are brought up in two different value systems. The value system that arises from the cosmology and the worldview of the West, which permeates Western culture, Western institutions, Western aspirations, Western view of the relationship between us as human beings, the world that we live in, Western conception of God, and so on. And the cosmology of the Vedic civilization, the darshana, the Vedic way of seeing the universe. And, Jeffrey very beautifully summarized that in one sentence, that the realization that we're not just this body, but we are indeed a being that is traversing through many lifetimes and many bodies is a fundamental reorientation. It's a reorientation. It's a recontextualization of how we relate to the possibility of our own lives. And as Jeffrey said, the questions that Jeffrey, nobody answered for him, and most likely nobody answered for any one of us, is who am I? What am I here for? What is my life for? What am I going to do with my life? And I put it this way, which is, how am I going to align my guna and with my karma, with my swabhava, with my swadharma, and so on, to borrow the Sanskrit words, which are much more sort of appropriate for this kind of conversation. That challenge every young person is facing to greater or lesser degrees, with greater or lesser degrees of clarity and confidence. And I think that getting into this conversation would be of tremendous value for them earlier in their lives than later. So, I mean, I've seen many Hindus who live for 75 years of their lives not ever visiting a Hindu text or a book, and then turn around and come back and start reading the Bhagavad Gita for the very first time, later in their lives. I mean, how would life be if we started reading these texts earlier, when it mattered more, when the choices and the opportunities of our life were still in front of us? So that is the inspiration, the opportunity of this particular course. Okay. Now, the reason, Jeffrey and I are going to teach this course together, and the design of that is based on this premise that Jeffrey and I have something in common, but we are coming at it from two different angles of approach, if you will, right? So I was born and raised in the Hindu culture, and I kind of wandered away towards the West, and then came right back and rediscovered the contemporary relevance of Hindu Dharma for myself. And Jeffrey was born in a Western culture as a Catholic, raised in a certain environment, and he has moved throughout his life in the other direction. So we are going to co-teach this course. Okay, and I think there is going to be a unique opportunity for insights that is going to be available as we do this. That's at least our hypothesis, and we are going to find out more about that. So now, Jeffrey, I want to, as we move into the course, the way we started was that there were we laid out a slew of topics, and I'm going to bring up some of the topics on the screen, and let me let's see if we can speak a little bit about the topics in this course.
if I may, Kalyan.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
I remember whenever I went to university,
Mhm.
they called the beginning of coming to the university orientation,
Right.
because people can be disoriented
Mhm.
and then they can be reoriented, or they can become oriented. So orient, of course, means facing east. So we're hoping that this class will be a reorientation for you, giving you new ways to look at what's been presented to you at first under stress, under the stress of colonization and social pressures that are very difficult to see past. Here we're trying to distill that essence of the Vedic culture. So we won't be promoting a particular sampradaya, a particular lineage, a particular perspective, but trying to bring a reorientation as an objective process of looking. And this is why the two of us represent the two sides of each of us that could look at the questions. So think of this as useful, balanced schizophrenia.
Yeah. Great. So, in the design of the course, what we've done is we've kind of laid out a whole series of topics. So if you look at this, we've kind of listed a whole bunch of topics here. And one of the things that we are going to do is we're going to invite the students themselves to vote on which topics they want to include in the course. So the course is going to be very dynamic in the sense that it's not going to come in with a fixed set of ideas about which topics we're going to cover, but rather we'll open it up for a variety of different topics to potentially be discussed based on the interest in the class. So, Jeffrey, do you want to maybe take a few minutes and go through some of these topics and share a little bit about how you see this course unfolding?
I'd love to, Kalyan. And for everyone, you'll notice that I'm a poet and a linguist. So I'm going to barrage you regularly with various forms of vocabulary and words. And the first one is, as I entered into the Vedic knowledge, then it occurred to me not only that we are an Atma going from life to life on an adventure, on a journey of learning. As Kalyan said, each of us goes through stages of learning. We suddenly wake up to another need or hunger for learning. So I like to call the universe the university. So will you all, for just a moment, just think of yourself, not in the ways you're used to thinking of yourself, but simply as a student, a stuti anta. Did you know student is a Sanskrit word? Studying the stutis to try to know where they're finally taking us, anta. So we're all students on a long journey. And what we've tried to do is assemble a list of subjects that are points of entry into the Vedic Vidya, so that we can use these as angles of trajectory for encountering the subject. And you'll notice that the first one is Purusha Artha. It really asks the question, and a famous guru from India actually made this the name of his organization. Artha and art are etymologically related. The English word art comes from the Sanskrit artha. So artha is, and so the guru, his organization was called the Art of Living. So Purusha, that's us. Person in English comes from Sanskrit Purusha. Pura, Isha, in the case of us in our body, which is called the City of Nine Gates. So Purusha Artha defining and then living a whole, complete, and fulfilled life. And this goes across many different subjects in the Vedic knowledge. Then Ashram Dharma. Ashram, as you probably know, means the stage of life that you're in. Are you single and celibate or not celibate? Are you married and making children? Are you going through that stage? But what are the implications of these stages of life? And we're going to see right away that in the Vedic Dharma, we're very interested in archetypal realities that everyone is experiencing on their journey. So that journey, otherwise known as the wheel of samsara, sam means together and sara means to swim. We're like a pod of dolphins swimming through the ocean of prakriti, the ocean of matter around us. You want to do a couple, Kalyan?
Sure, why not? Oneness and identity, and clearly, when we talk about identity, we carry so many identities. I am a Hindu, I am an Indian, I am of this community, I belong to this religion, this nation, and on and on. And this profession, I'm an engineer, I'm an artist. And we are cast about in a world of identities. In fact, identity politics is the
It's a good pun. we cast about in the world of identities.
Right. And and to discover the oneness, the unity underlying the identity, that is the vision of the Vedanta. And it's an extraordinary moment when the identities that we hold on so fast to and are so attached to loosen their grip on us a little bit. And it's a profound moment when we can carry those identities with us a little more easily. We have them, but we're not had by them, and we're able to recognize the oneness that underlies all of that. And of course,
if I may add to that, there's a last question that the Vedantins ask, which is individuality a part of the temporary self or a part of our permanent self? And so the different schools of Vedanta, the Advaita of Shankara, the Vashishtadvaita of Ramanuja, the Dvaita of Madhva, the Achinchabheda Veda of Chaitanya, are theme and variations on all the identity questions and oneness and distinction questions that could be answered. So it's a very profound discussion, and it's never supposed to be bitter and angry and acrimonious and trying to defeat one another. It's supposed to be a gentleman's conversation conducted with respect and referencing the authority of the Veda.
Great. And the next theme is Dharma versus religion, which is such a profound distinction between the two. And the unfortunate translation of Dharma into religion that keeps happening when we try to represent the Sanskrit in English. We'll have to recover the word Dharma completely.
And differentiated from the word religion by its linguistics.
That's right. And get out of the misalignment that results from collapsing those two words. Clearly Dharma is a source of ethics, a source of values, as a source of a sense of our duties and responsibilities of life, and all of the different connotations that the word represents. To bring it fully alive in our lives be a tremendous opportunity. That's that particular topic.
And as a footnote to that, the thing that we're going to be distinguishing is the correct English words to use in this conversation, and to take out the colonizing terms that have made the conversation confused. A good example is identifying Dharma as religion. Who called it religion? The colonizers who colonized India. So therefore, they're already bad players. So we shouldn't use their terminology. We're going to try to clear up the terminology during the course of all these topics. Go ahead.
Yeah, and of course the Hindu concept of Brahman and its unfolding into Purusha and Prakriti will deal with the realm of consciousness, the material world, and the interrelationships between them, and how in Western cosmology, consciousness is an epiphenomenon of matter. And that's why in contemporary consciousness studies, the scientists keep going to look for consciousness in the brain. They start wondering if this part of the brain produces that, or that part of the brain produces some other effect, and so on. Whereas the Vedic vision on this matter is very clear, that it is the material world that emerges and from consciousness and submerges back into consciousness, and that whole distinction will be brought out in this particular topic. I'll stop here, Jeffrey. You pick up from here for a few more.
Right. So the corollary to this is something you almost never hear Hindus describing, and that is the concept of Brahman, that place of reality from which our Atma is supposedly an emanation, and Prakriti, because we have to use these Sanskrit terms in order to create a differentiation from the Abrahamic religions or modern sciences dialogue. It's all a matter of using terminology. If you use their terminology, you can't make the distinction. So Briha, or Brahman, this realm that is luminous instead of dark by its nature, and how that is related to Prakriti, Prakriti, that place where pra, everything is produced, kri, by strings of cause and effect, iti, iterated or repeated all over and over again. But as soon as we say Brahman and Prakriti, now we ask the meaning of the words. Now we start to see the distinction of the conversation. And it is those conversations that have not been conducted correctly. And we're going to try to help to reconduct those discussions using the correct Sanskrit terminology. Then in the future, you can also explain these terms to others. I've never met a scientist from the West who understands Brahman, just as a simple example. So they have no idea that there could be a reality that exists that is opposite in characteristics to Prakriti, because Prakriti is all they're immersed in, which a yogi would say is the problem, not the solution. But what is Buddhi Yoga? What is the discerning yoga? So just as a hint, that's the meaning of Ganesha, but more on that later.
Jeffrey, why don't you share a little bit about this topic, scope of the Vedas, Vedic teachings about teaching the Vedas?
Okay. Well, the way to think of this has not been told to almost everyone. I want everyone who's listening just to think for a moment. What are the 6 sciences that absolutely must be learned and practiced by members of the Vedic civilization, which keep the knowledge of the Vedas moving forward in history? There are 6 of them. I'll give you a hint. In relation to my body, these are my limbs, otherwise known as angas. So there are 6 Veda angas, known as Vedangas. You cannot entirely understand the Vedic library until you know that there are 6 sciences that are carrying it forward. And I'm just going to say their names. They are Jyotish, or Vedic astrology; Kalpa, the study of the rituals and paraphernalia that go into them; Siksha, phonetics; Vyakarana, grammar; Nirukta, etymology; and Chandas, poetry. You'll notice that of these 6 subjects, 4 are linguistic. I'm willing to bet you have never in your life heard someone describe the Vedas this way. That the first thing to know is there are 4 sciences of Sanskrit as a language that must be mastered by someone so the library of Vedic knowledge can move forward in history. And the other 2 sciences are the relationship to astrology, Jyotish, because that's the basis of understanding karma, and then kalpa, the correct procedure for interacting with matter through rituals. All right, just a taste.
Okay, wonderful. Let's move on. Let's pick up another one here. From the Vedas to NASA, astronomy and time, and the antiquity of Hindu culture. Jeffrey.
Well, one of my dear friends and someone I respect just massively is Nilesh Oak, whose various books on the astronomy, the astronomical references in both the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which, as you probably know, are called itihasa. That is roughly translated into English, not completely and perfectly, as it was, itihasa, as things were at a particular time. What's so important? Well, it turns out that in both of these epic stories, there are astronomical references which, with modern technology, can be traced back to the time in history when someone would have pointed to the sky and said, that's what's going on in the sky. This is mind-blowing. And Nilesh Oak has written books about this, so please look him up. And he has many great videos about it. But this is a pivotal part of the Vedic understanding, because we are not asserting that the culture of the Vedas comes from a certain time in history. The astronomical coordinates to prove that are in the Vedas. And there is not another set of literature on our planet that has astronomical references to the sky 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 years ago, which scientists from NASA can verify with their modern equipment. And this is exactly what Nilesh has done. He simply brought all this forward in a way that you cannot deny it. So we're in a renaissance. This is an undeniable moment when the astronomical references from the Mahabharata and Ramayana are scientifically, provably dating the Vedas tens of thousands of years ago. Isn't that amazing? So that and much more.
Right. So I'm going to point to a couple more in the interest of time. Let's move on to the gunas and doshas and Ayurveda, Jeffrey. I know it's a favorite topic of yours.
This is one of the wonderful ones. This is the secret to so-called caste, which, by the way, is a Portuguese word and not a Sanskrit word. So there is no such word in Sanskrit as caste. Kasta means power inherited by birth. Let me ask you a quick question. So does everyone in Western civilization inherit the money and land and resources of their parents? Yes or no? For the most part, yes. How about in England? Well, as a matter of fact, in England, the land is only passed on to the lords and ladies, and everyone else is a peasant who lives on the land. Ladies and gentlemen, that's called a caste system. It means power inherited by birth. That is caste. But Varna, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, is based upon guna and dosha. And dosha is based upon the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space, which produce 3 different body types, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, which then elaborate into the particular characteristics of our body, which then is used by Ayurveda to know what's the best food and herbs for us to utilize. Now, guna is based on the scientific principle that didn't come from modern science, but from ancient Bharat, that there are 3 principles operating in nature. Things are created, they're maintained for a while, then entropy drags them down and breaks them into pieces. Those are called the 3 gunas. They're, first of all, the basis of science. Second of all, the basis of what we call morality, because from sattva, from maintaining ourselves in a harmonious relation with nature, we can go to raja, and in raja just want what I want and only for me, and from there slide to tamas and become dark, destructive, and eventually sura. This entire conversation in Sanskrit in the Vedas is scientific, and the gunas and doshas massively have been now scientifically verified to the point that, and we'll talk about this when we do talk about it, that modern genetics has now been validated as linked with the gunas and doshas by scientific experiments that have shown that you can know the gene code from the dosha, and the dosha predicts the gene code, and the Vedic astrology chart can predict both of those. All of this science is coming forward now, but has been practiced in the Vedas for a very long time.
So, we wanted to give you all a little taste of the kind of topics and themes that we are going to explore during this course. I want to also say a little bit about the format of the course. It's going to be very conversational, very dialogical. There will be lots of opportunities for the students to ask questions and engage in a conversation that unfolds some of these things, particularly in a language that is intelligible, contemporary, and very carefully spoken, so that the normal confusions that arise from somewhat lazily translating a Sanskrit word into an equivalent English word, and in the process of such a translation lose half its meaning completely along the way. We are going to try to avoid, and we're going to actually very carefully make the distinction between the Sanskrit word and the implications it carries, like guna, like dosha, like karma, like the number of different words that you've spoken already, purusha, prakriti, brahman, and so on. We're also going to look at the typical English words they get translated to in most ordinary, somewhat, I'm going to say, not very deeply well thought out translations, in which one thing that happens is the baggage that the English word carries from its own tradition, from the English cosmology, the English, the Western cosmology is often not very clear. It's not at the forefront. And I think one of the things that makes Jeffrey very unique as a teacher is that he's going to be able to move across these 2 cosmologies very, very well, very effectively, and bring to the forefront of the conversation the baggage, the Western baggage that many of these English words carry, which oftentimes is not very clear for us as Hindus. Okay, we don't understand it because we have not studied it. And we end up loosely translating Sanskrit words into English, assuming that that translation has somehow rendered the word intelligible, whereas it has not. It has created more confusions and more problems. And Jeffrey, you want to add a few words to this particular dimension of this course?
I'd love to. As a matter of fact, let's do one of my favorites. because I just cleaned up the Bhagavad Gita by taking out all the colonizing terms. And one of the ones that make it into every translation is the English word Lord, Lord. And I want you to just to pause for a moment and look inside yourself and tell me what the exact definition of that word is. Nothing vague. Don't give me a synonym. I want you to think in your mind and tell me the meaning of the word, not another word for that word. I want to know what it actually means. That's called this etymology. Because you're going to laugh.
I'm going to invite people to put something up in the chat window, okay?
Yes.
Whatever comes to your mind, please.
What does Lord really mean, ladies and gentlemen? Come on, tell me. And tell me why we should translate the Bhagavad Gita Lord Krishna instead of Sri Krishna. So is Lord a synonym for Sri? Otherwise, why would we do that? Why would every Bhagavad Gita I've ever seen translate Lord Krishna? All right, you ready? You sure you know or don't know? A supreme power. No, you couldn't be more wrong. Overlord, not a chance. Yeah, think landlord, and you're closer. Don't think overlord. Don't give it a lot of glory. The word Lord, now listen carefully, is from Old English, and it's Haflard. Halflard. Haflard and Haflady. The HALF is Old English for loaf, like a loaf of bread. Loaf, lady, and loaf, lord, are the name for the caste system of lords and ladies in England. And half means loaf. So the lord and lady words mean lady is the one who bakes the bread. Lord is the one who protects the bread and then gives it out to the peasants in the English caste system. The peasants who don't own land, the Lord owns the land. Now there's a prayer in Christianity which is related to this. Give us this day our daily bread. It's called the Paternoster, the Lord's Prayer, which is about giving bread to the peasants. That's also how Rome kept from having revolution. They gave free bread to the peasants. So this term, Lord, is all about the bread. Now, isn't it interesting that money is, in the slang of modern English, called bread? So what I want you to know is that the word Lord should be removed from all Vedic texts immediately. Get out your red ink pen and scratch it out. So Lord and Lady is protecting the loaves of bread. And I'm sorry, but it's not even healthy bread. It's white bread. It's the white bread that colonized India. So don't you be having that bread for lunch.
Okay, so there was at least one example of a foray into what Lord means in the original language, in the English language, and its etymology, and how it has come to represent something else entirely. When we translate Sri Krishna, Bhagavan Krishna into Lord Krishna. And there's a lot more of this in the course, obviously. We will be doing this almost in every class, I presume, taking words and making sure that we don't translate it lazily into an English equivalent that somehow ends up obscuring that word. Now, I mean, we're almost at the top of the hour. Our intention was to provide a kind of a taste, a flavor of this course. And this course is going to unfold in conversation, in dialogue, both between Jeffrey and me, as well as with the students. and hopefully there'll be a tremendous amount of learning potential in these classes. Okay, I want to obviously extend an invitation for all of you to, if you're in the age group 18 to 35, please register yourself into this course. Or if you know somebody who would listen to you and listen to this course, invite them to take this course. So Ankur is putting up a small poll here. It's got a couple of questions. Can you please respond to these questions? Are you interested in this course? Yes, no, and maybe. The second question is, do you know somebody? Can you ensure someone you know in the age group 18 to 35 joins this course?
May I add something?
Yeah, please, Jeffrey.
There's a term in English when you want to depict someone in a way that is unfavorable, you frame them. This means, like with a picture, the frame changes the way you see the picture. So framing is a linguistic art that is used by civilizations to paint a picture of another civilization to justify what they've done to that civilization. So ladies and gentlemen, you have been framed by the English colonizers who depicted your culture in particular ways convenient to their goals of robbing you blind, which they did successfully. The aftermath, the damage that still remains, is what we're going to remove through this class. We're going to bring these Sanskrit, Vedic, Hindu notions back to their original clarity. And we're going to unframe and reframe the Vedic civilization on its own terms. And you are pioneers learning how to reprogram and undo this negative framing. And this is the real education. It's adhikari. When Kalyan was talking earlier, I wanted to say, and remember now, in the Vedic civilization, the guru does not tell the student. The student asks questions of the guru, and the guru serves the student by answering the question. Why? Because the point is seva. It is to answer the question that allows the student to move to the next level of understanding and to unframe all of the places they've been erroneously framed. And that's why the most perfect language for this process is Sanskrit. I hope you'll join us and stay with us in this important historical moment when we're unframing and reframing the Vedic civilization.
Okay, great. So let me make this request. Everybody, please go ahead and answer the question. No is a valid answer. If you're not interested, you can say no. So please just make sure you answer the question so we get something from everybody. Okay. I'm going to take a few questions from the Q&A box, Jeffrey, and I'm going to direct you towards them. So let me ask, somebody's bent out of shape about, is Aryan a race according to you, Jeffrey? That's a question. So.
No. Just as Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are not something you can get by being born in a particular family, they're abilities. So Aryan is an adhikari. Aryan is a restatement of your interest in the well-being of all living entities instead of your own selfish gain. Asura is the opposite of Arya. And Aryan is sometimes called the noble people, but unfortunately that looks like the filthy rich who are dominating everyone. So don't use that. It's those persons who live their life in such a way that they're always considering the well-being of every living entity on the planet. And they cultivate the knowledge that supports that aim. That aspiration to live one's own self-life, selfish life, in such a way that everyone else also benefits is the hallmark of the Aryan civilization. And of course, it then includes the Vedic Vidya, which supports and empowers that process.
Wonderful. So I think that settles that question about whether Aryan is a race or not. Okay, so now I think there are a couple of questions about, is the course going to be restricted to the age group 18 to 35? And let me answer it this way. We want to give the priority to the 18 to 35-year-olds in the course. We're not going to restrict it to 18 to 35, but our hope and aspiration is that they will be the sort of the active members in the class and will get to participate by engaging in conversations and dialogue, and hopefully they will drive the conversation.
And coming in from the outside, maybe I can add something to that.
Please.
There's a saying in English, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So we don't mind if old dogs come to the class, but we don't want them asking questions because there's such an etiquette in the Vedic civilization of respect to elders that it makes it difficult to be honest. So the only two people that will be answering questions are myself and Kalyan, and the only people asking questions will be under 35. If anyone else wants to observe and listen, then they'll have to ask their questions offline so they don't change the mood. This class is designed for those of you who are finding yourself on your journey, and truly we want to hear your questions and not have you suppress yourself in any way whatsoever. So we invite your questions as a vital necessity to this class. And so therefore we'll ask the old dogs to just remain silent and listen and talk to us offline.
Yeah. So there's a question about, actually there's a concern in the Q&A box, which says, if you let the students pick the topics, there'll be a lot of chaos in the class. Well, I am, I'm confident Jeffrey knows how to manage the chaos very well, and between the two of us, we will let the chaos unfold, but we'll manage it very effectively. Okay, so that is, please rest assured.
I call it tongue fu. So if you ask a dumb question, don't expect to get a polite answer. We'll say that's not relevant right now. Consider that later on, or talk to us offline, because this class is for all of the participants. So sometimes questioners try to show how brilliant they are, or hog the spotlight, or take over, co-opt the class. And we will not tolerate that, because we're here for all of the students. So the questions that are important to everyone are the best questions to ask. Do not be afraid to ask questions, but be careful that the questions are for the well-being of the entire class and not just yourself.
All right. So let us see. There's a question, interesting question here. People are often calling the decolonized Hindu history as a revisionist history. Will this course help us with what to say when we are confronted by people name-calling a Hindu narrative as revisionist?
This is why I mentioned the concept of reframing, because anyone who uses language to put you in a box like that is essentially trying to frame you again. And yes, my little joke about tongue fu is not just a joke. It is the art of using language, and specifically Sanskrit and precise English, to clarify rather than cause more confusion. The problem with the Vedic library is that it's a library, you understand? So if you are the people of a library, what I say to my friends who have only one book, the Abrahamics, and I have affectionate relations and respect for the respectful Abrahamics, not the colonizing ones, but the respectful ones. Another person's religion is their business, isn't it? That's fine. There's nothing that we as Vedics have against that. But there's a difference between being of a particular religious persuasion and trying to undermine the Vedic culture as a colonizer. So we're going to debug that and all of those things that were done to frame the Vedic civilization and speak untruth about it. That is part of what these questions are all about. They're to give you clear, authoritative answers that are provable and that you can trace back to original source material so that you can speak about the Vedic civilization now and unframe the places where the culture's been framed.
And reframe it in the way we want to frame it, reframe it.
Precisely so. Well said.
All right, everybody. So I think that is the webinar for today. I'd like to thank everybody for participating. And I'd also like to encourage all of you to register for the course, keeping in view that this is a course we want to definitely make available for the young people in the age group 18 to 35 who are grappling with the challenges and the opportunities of living in two cultures simultaneously. There is a chance that we can distill the best of the two cultures for ourselves. But there's also the risk of acquiring the worst of both the cultures at the same time. So this is an intercultural, comparative, translational type of exploration, and it's an experimental course. And we look forward to having a good class, and let's see how it unfolds, and we'll experiment more in the future. With that, I'd like to say thank you all. Namaste. Thank you for participating, and look forward to seeing you in the course. Namaskar, everybody. Thank you.
And in this course, we're going to put the can-do back into Hindu. Thanks for joining us.
Namaste.
Namaste.